Welcome to Veganpodden.se. After last episode, which was a special edition in English with focus on India, we decided to totally swap language from Swedish and from now on start producing all episodes in English. This is to enable more people to get access to especially all interesting interviews that are done. Veganism is global, and this podcast covers society, business, trends, and all that are relevant in life, from a vegan perspective. In earlier podcasts, we have covered animal welfare, business, and also rules and regulations concerning vegans. Today, we talk about being vegan itself, or being an activist, or being very, very concerned. More precisely, we talk about the difficulties in terms of mental stress, frustration, and anxiety that many in today's society can feel, and especially vegan activists. In this episode, we interviewed two different psychologists. One is from Australia and one is from Sweden, both vegans, and both experienced in the anxiety that the vegans can feel. We will start by talking to Clare Mann from Australia, who calls herself a vegan psychologist and is an expert on the psychological stress that vegans can feel in a non-vegan world. Clare Mann discusses how vegans can feel in a non-vegan world and also how they can go about when it comes to communicating. In our talk with Clare, we also try to understand how some people, like vegans, can feel so bad about animal industry, and other people can choose to work within it. And in this episode, we will also be talking to Paula Richter from Sweden. She's a psychologist also working as climate psychologist and involved in Psychologist for Sustainable Development. And she also is herself a vegan. She gives us some leads on how vegans can reduce the anxiety they feel. Let's hear what this stress that vegans can feel is about and what can we do to help each other. Being an activist is one of the keys. Soon we will hear more about all this. My name is Minal Parek Nygård. I am Swedish and have Indian origin. I am vegan. So let's get started. Clare Mann, who lives in Australia, is a vegan psychologist, communication trainer, and also author. She has written the book Dystopia, where she coins the term dystopia, that explains the specific suffering that vegans can have. The book is about the anguish of being vegan in a non-vegan world. So, how is it being a vegan in a non-vegan world?
Well, I'm certainly a telling witness to that. And firstly, I think a lot of people believe, they sort of say, well, why are people so fussy about these things? The non-vegan world will say, why are they getting so upset? And people don't really get upset about being told they've got a fussy diet. They get upset when they have become aware of the systematized and institutionalized cruelty towards animals, which is legal and standardized. And when they tell people, these people either don't care or they don't want to hear anymore. So living as a vegan in a non-vegan world, the world is seen very differently. I've only been vegan for 10 years, and for many years before, I could walk through a shopping centre or I could look into a shop for something. And now I see it differently. I see what people are eating, and I don't think of food, I think of the animal suffering. I see a fur collar on a coat, and I see an animal in a cage losing their skin. And so vegans see the world very differently. And so they have to deal with the anxiety or the anguish of knowing about the allowable suffering towards animals and totally unnecessary. At the same time, then they tell people, and people either minimize it or say, don't tell me what to do, it's my choice. And so the anguish is both with people, but mainly about knowing about the intense suffering of animals on the planet.
What can they do about the problems?
When people become vegan for themselves, it's about a fussy diet usually. It's about having a plant-based diet, and they might sort of moderate. When they do it for the animals, it's easier in the sense there's no choice. You would live on the worst diet if it was. However, science also tells us that a well-balanced, whole food plant-based diet is the most healthful. So some of the things we absolutely need to do is to ensure that our health, our well-being, our social support is all in place. And I call that really comes under self-awareness. And then we match that with a level of good communication so we can share these ideas and make the world a more compassionate, kinder place through people's choices. So at the first level, we've got to go back to the basics of self-care, really, of making sure we eat well, we exercise, we drink lots of water, we sleep well. We have some things outside, particularly for people that are vegan activists, so they're trying to expose the truth, maybe in cubes of truth, or they go to fur farms, or they try and tell the public. And these are very distressing things. We need time away from that sort of advocacy. It's very important. So because it refreshes us and it puts credit in our emotional bank, so to speak. It's important to have social support, is to be able to debrief with people about the fact that we don't feel so understood by people, or we don't fit in so much as we used to. Not because we're judging other people, it's because we know about this awful suffering and other people say, well, I'm going to continue because I don't see it at the moment. Those things need to be put in place. Good exercise, meditation, I would suggest, and then learning the skills to have conversations that matter so that you come away from every conversation knowing that you nudge people in the right direction.
So when it comes to psychologists or therapists, is there something a professional can help a vegan that may suffer from anxiety or frustration or even more?
And so in coming to a vegan therapist or feeling comfortable talking to someone who gets this is very important, because or else people say, well, you can't tell other people what to do, or why are you so upset? There's nothing you can do about it. Animals were here to eat. And to have those responses by someone would be very distressing. So having the term which I gave was dystopia, it enables people to have a conversation with their doctor, with their own non-vegan psychologist, with their family, to say, look, it's not just an extended form of grief or anxiety or depression, which can be the symptoms of dystopia. It is directly related to the fact that I found that this terrible secret that is hidden in plain sight, which everybody is doing every day and not even realizing the suffering they're causing. So my pain is real. And it's not because I'm overreacting. It's because once we find out about it, it is totally unacceptable. So there's, I think, normalizing it, having a yardstick against which to deal with those things, but then helping people through the grief of that, the normal strategies to help people through anxiety and depression, to process that information, to learn new ways to manage those anxious responses. And part of that is how to communicate more effectively. So you set boundaries with people, you can deal with some of the pushback from other people.
What is it that makes some people more sensitive to how animals are suffering and others can accept it or don't see it?
Well, it's also a broader question, isn't it? What makes people, sensitive to other people's suffering versus I'm just going to look after myself? And I think there are a number of variables there. Psychologists would possibly suggest that there are some personality variables, that people who have more of a feeling orientation than a thinking orientation, based on one personality measure would be the Myers-Briggs type indicator, a preference for how you process information and then make decisions. So a more feeling person doesn't mean they're a nicer person. It just means that they see the world through values and the suffering of others, or the empathy with others' experiences. A thinking person is using more of their logical brain as a preference. It doesn't mean each person can't use the opposite. So there are possibly some personality variables. I think the social context in which people are born, families, if a family is someone who they're able to talk about feelings, they're able to empathize with the lonely neighbor next door. But if people have good experiences, seeing our parents be kind to animals, that can have the propensity to shape the future of how we're socialized, really. So there's a nature-nurture element, I guess, and the country we're born in of what is appropriate. We have this thing called speciesism, where we eat some animals and we have friends as others. This is all learnt cultural behaviors.
Sometimes vegans feel offended by non-vegans, and vice versa. Sometimes the non-vegans feel offended by vegans. How can you better communicate with each other? I mean, I think that sometimes the non-vegans can feel that the vegans are kind of opposing their views on them, or they are making them feel guilt, and vice versa. The vegans may feel that if they eat the vegan food in the cafeteria, that the non-vegans think that they are making a statement.
As a psychologist, I would say a big statement here is we can't offend someone without their permission. Okay, in the same way I can't insult you without your permission. I could say, look, that dress is really awful on you, which of course it isn't. And if you say, I can't believe you've said that to me, that is awful, you have no right to say it. You are taking on that, you're interpreting it, accepting it, as opposed to, well, that's your opinion, Claire. So I can't offend you without your permission. You have to buy into that. However, you're absolutely right. Non-vegans often, and the other way around, feel that somehow they're being judged. Now, they don't have to accept that judgment, but actually as an experience, I've seen a lot of it, more in veganism than anything probably, is that there is pushback very quickly. Even psychologists or counsellors, doctors are saying to their patients is, don't try and make me feel guilty. Now, professionals shouldn't say that. That's nothing to do with how they feel. If somebody went to a psychologist and said that they had a religious belief and they believed they were going to heaven and the other person wasn't unless they believed, you wouldn't have the psychologist saying, don't make me feel guilty, I'm going to hell. It just wouldn't happen. But with veganism, it is. And I think it's because our everyday experiences cause enormous suffering to animals, even if we don't want to cause suffering. We have to make decisions to choose something different. It's so ubiquitous. It happens everywhere. In many ways, we want to have the best outcome for animals. And so obviously for us to try and shame people and say, I can't believe you're eating the flesh of the tortured souls, is probably an aggressive thing. It might be true, but it's not. It might make the person feel a bit better telling somebody the truth, but is it going to change the plight for animals? Is it going to help that person make better choices, informed choices about how to live without causing so much harm? Or is it just going to make you feel better? So I use a marker is if the animal in the cage looked at me and said, I asked them, am I doing a good job? I want them to say yes, not you just got angry and felt a bit self-satisfied. So in many ways, a good example, a good way to be doing this is when someone says, oh no, I still eat animals. And they say, I only buy animals from happy farms, for instance. The way a vegan can answer that is to say, do you know, there was a time when I believed that too. I believed it was possible that we could still eat the things we want to eat, and yet animals didn't suffer or they had a better life. And then I found out, and you tell them what you found, and you therefore say, so I thought, well, how is it, it's indefensible really to hurt animals in this way if we don't need to. So that's sort of, there was a time I believed that too. It doesn't put us as superior. It's like we've all been brought up this way mostly, and we've all eaten these animals. We didn't know, but then when I found out something, I was able to make a better choice. Can I tell you so that you too can choose, as opposed to shaming someone and as if they're responsible for all the animals suffering in the world, which of course they're not.
Do you feel that there is a change in psychologists around the world being able to take care of the needs for vegans or activists?
Well, number one, there are a lot of vegan psychologists that actually don't call themselves that. Okay, but it's interesting because non-vegans often say, oh, I'm very understanding. People can have whatever values they like. And to vegans who have just come from undercover work in the slaughterhouse, they say, well, that's not good enough. I don't want you to be able to respect my values. I want you to respect animals' values. So in many ways, a lot of vegans find it very difficult to talk to non-vegans about these issues because they say, well, if you really got it, you'd have to be vegan. You couldn't believe the suffering that goes on and still choose to be part of it. It's just not possible. Other people go, well, I can handle that. And that's a very big compassionate place to be because non-vegans are not without compassion. But it's just where vegans have just extended that window to encompass animals. We also get vegans, of course, that don't like people. They're not very nice to people. I don't think that's a very vegan value because we're animals too, actually. And I think I can understand when people go, well, why are people still being so selfish? I think it's more complex than that. Is most people do not want to hurt animals, but they've been able to separate from that. We've been socialized for so many years. We're indoctrinated. We try to shield ourselves from pain. The way we're marketed to doesn't show animal suffering, it shows meat in a plastic wrapping. And so most people are good people making bad decisions and doing bad things. Our job is to live with that, extend compassion to people and invite them to extend their understanding of how we've all been duped. I think it's important that when someone goes to see a psychologist, they don't have to experience everything people experience. I don't have to have, had a fatal illness or had gone through divorce to actually say, I need to do that to understand you, because everyone's experience is different, but we need to have sufficient life experiences. I think the different with veganism is a little bit different, because if you and I were having a conversation and you don't believe in sexist behaviour or racist behaviour, we can agree with that and then we can go out to lunch together. With veganism, unless we choose specifically not to go to a certain place or not do certain things, we will abuse animals. Every time we put sugar in our tea, we may not choose to abuse animals, but there's animal products involved. Whereas on the other issues, we will say, I won't do that, or I won't buy my t-shirts from a sweatshop and abuse children. But with veganism, we can't not just not do certain things. Our actions are inherently abusive because of how this has been set up in our world.
So do you think it's getting more widely understood and accepted by psychologists around the globe, or is there an awakening in this area, or is it still very non-existing?
Well, I'm actually seeing, and I've seen it more than ever, bad behaviour on the part of psychologists of telling vegans, stop judging me, stop pushing your ideas, when that's not a psychologist's job. A psychologist's job would be, if the person kept pushing it and really being forceful, is to try to explore whether the person felt they wanted to do that, not to say, don't make me feel guilty. So I think there's still a lot of pushback I'm experiencing. However, I hope and I know the word dystopia is given a yardstick for academics and researchers to start exploring more of that and actually saying, well, is it a separate issue? Is it something specific, relative, separate from other forms of anguish?
Can you say something about Australia? First of all, just with veganism, it's interesting to know how the trend is going in Australia, but also when it comes to, since you are there as a professional, mental health vegans and how they are being greeted.
Yes, well, it's interesting. It's been a very, very fast-growing movement, I think, in Australia, and there's been a lot of second to places like initially to things like the UK, the growth in veganism. So, more people becoming vegan for animal rights reasons, for health reasons, environmental reasons. But, the true meaning of veganism really is the non-use and non-exploitation of animals. So it's all related in many ways. There's different tenets there. And that was growing dramatically, but there's been enormous pushback from the governments after the release of the film Dominion, which showed what was happening to animals in intensive farming and establishments in Australia. And on the anniversary of that, a group of activists held up the streets of a major city called Melbourne. And there was enormous pushback from the government, changes in the law, the biosecurity legislation, that even if we know there is cruelty going on in these establishments, if we take footage of it, we are done for trespassing. So it's a bit of a cover-up there. So that's caused a lot of distress to vegans, I think. And it was moving in the right direction, there's no doubt about that. Certainly in terms of people eating different foods, I think 2020 has forced people to reconsider that actually the Wuhan markets are no different than factory farms in terms of the filthy conditions and the disease-spreading zoonotic diseases. So I think people of the public are starting to change behaviour, and once they do that, they can open the door to finding out about the ethical aspects of it. 2020 is a challenging time. A lot of people are working from home at the moment. There's a lot of mental health issues around the world as people's lives are being thrown up in the air. And so I think for vegans who can't get out and advocate for animals, I think that's causing a lot of distress.
Actually, I just wanted to jump back to one of the questions I had earlier, because I think it's a bit interesting. It's about how some people can agree to work or see other things and some people cannot. I'm thinking about people working in batteries or slaughterhouses, how they can deal with it, because they are not shielded from what they see. So what is actually going on? Because I think it's very difficult for vegans to understand how you can work with it.
Nobody goes down to go out for a glass of wine with someone and say, hey, I work in an abattoir, and oh, that's fantastic, what a wonderful job. There's usually a certain amount of shame attached to that because they know there's going to be judgment. And it's not a nice job. There are people that we could call psychopaths who seek out positions of abuse. They seek it out in slaughterhouses, in animal experimentation. They seek it out in the military, in old people's homes. We know some people in all areas of life will seek out these opportunities. But I would say they were a small percentage. When we look at the social demographic of the people that work in slaughterhouses, they're unskilled workers. They're often immigrants. They're not speaking the native tongue of the country, so their job opportunities are limited. They've often come from countries where there's war. They're desperate for work and make a new start. They've come from oppression, or they're born in a town or village where there's no other opportunities, and it was the thing that dad did and uncle did. It becomes part of that normalization. The suffering amongst slaughterhouse workers is enormous. The self-medication of alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence. These are not nice jobs. People to actually get up every day and have animals begging for their lives. Unless you're a psychopath, that is very difficult for people, and it usually results in enormous mental illness issues. Or they go and hit out, they become numb and sort of anesthetized from it, and then they hit out at other people. People say, well, I would never do that. I'd do any other job. Sometimes there aren't any other jobs, and the person has to choose between letting their children starve, literally, and or working there. The whole system is a form of abuse. So it abuses humans, it abuses animals, it abuses our wildlife, our waterways, our oceans. There is nothing good going for animal agriculture or animal experimentation. So extending our compassion to people that we perceive have no compassion, the suffering is enormous. There's often economic policies that are known as the revolving door of violence. What happens is that governments set up an abattoir and a prison in the same town. And so let's take a stereotype. A man hits a woman and it is so serious that he goes into prison. He tries to reform, he tries to get his life back. So when he comes out and gets his family back, he wants to pay his bills, he wants to support his family. The only job he's got is in the slaughterhouse. He goes to the slaughterhouse, he is re-traumatized, he starts drinking, he goes home, he hits his wife, and he goes back to prison. Economists call it a revolving door of violence. And these are deliberate policies in regional areas of government abuse, actually, to abuse the humans that get caught in the cycle of violence. And the animals suffer enormously as a result.
I have seen in some activist group that there are some former people who have worked in slaughterhouses that after that become vegan. Is that something common, or
yeah, it is.
Have any experience from that?
Well, it's not so much common. I certainly have. People have come to see me that were ex-slaughterhouse workers, ex-hunters, and the shame, the enormous grief, and then they explain is, I had to make a choice. I needed to work. I wanted to put a roof over my head. There were no jobs. I was born in a town. I didn't have any qualifications. I emigrated. There was all these sort of things. And I think they often turn into activists because they try to make right the wrongs. There's a very big difference between gratuitously causing harm or willful ignorance once you know and there are other choices. And then I think we've got a bigger systemic problem. If we're not prepared either to kill the animal ourselves or we're not prepared to work in in establishments that do this, then why are we paying someone else to do it that then has enormous suffering and their families and their communities suffer? It is morally indefensible that we can allow ourselves to do this for nothing more inconsequential than our taste buds, our traditions, our habits.
We have now heard the vegan psychologist Clare Mann from Australia. And if you are interested in more information, there is a website with more resources.
On my website, veganpsychologist.com, there are lots of free resources to do with how to communicate more effectively, trying to understand why people don't change and what we can do about it. There's also meditations to create a vegan world. So there's lots of tools and techniques that people can access, as well as other things they could purchase like books.
There are many things in life and society that gives rise to different opinions. Sometimes the opinions are so deep that it more or less feels like a question of life and death. Issues concerning animal welfare, climate and human rights can feel more than just an opinion. Some people become activists and try to fight for, in their mind, a better world. In any case, sometimes a deep concern can result in deep anxiety, frustration, and a sense of being the only sane person in a world where no one else seems to care. Are you the only one that sees how bad all is? Many vegans become active. They see injustices done to animals and want to spread the knowledge of what is happening. Some vegan activists hold so-called vigils. It can be standing in solidarity with animals at slaughterhouses and also documenting what is happening, since slaughterhouses are otherwise quite hidden areas. Images from places where animals are being killed or ill-treated are usually not something that is shown in ordinary life. You need to explicitly look for them. Social media will not show them. They are said to be too graphic. Too graphic to show, and yet something that is legal and is caused by the non-vegan world, especially in their dairy consumption and meat eating. So we hardly see it on news, TV shows, films or radio programs. We do not know how screaming pigs before dying sounds like. It is shielded from us. Some activists go against their own comfort zone. They go to places where they will see animals in distress, pain and being killed, just to document for the world to see. Some vegans wonder how on earth they can get enough psychological strength to keep on doing these things that are very hurtful for them to experience. In social media, I have read activists talking about sleepless nights and anxiety, their frustration of not being able to do enough, not reaching enough impact to save the animals they care for. So what can we do about this anxiety? And can it be dangerous? So I called Paula Richter in Sweden to hear from a psychologist's viewpoint how activists can handle anxiety and other sufferings. Paula is a psychologist who also has been a vegan for many years. She is part of Climate Psychologist and also active in Psychologist for Sustainable Development, which is a part of Swedish Psychologist Association. So when it comes to psychology, are there any typical sufferings that people that are activists may get? For example, if they experience a society that the society does too little to tackle the problems that they may feel is crucial?
I would say that when you become an activist, typically you have actually less symptoms, because if you become an activist, it is because you have already seen this. And when you see all this that is going on and you do not act on it, that's when you feel really bad. So usually you have a lot of more symptoms and you have more anxiety when you don't act according to your beliefs. And then when you start to get together with others and you start acting, which I would say is what I mean when I say activist, then some of it gets to be a little bit less of anxiety usually.
So a symptom, what can the symptoms, like if you, for example, do not act and you do not agree with how the world looks like, so how can the symptoms that you suffer from look like?
Well, there is also, I need to say, there is also a way to act upon this, which means that you diminish or you deny. So that's another part of how you may act. If you try, your psyche tries to fool you that this is not a problem. You don't see this problem. But I think that what you're talking about now is when people have gone beyond this denying and they really actually see what's going on. And that, of course, could be both anxiety, frustration, of course, and also I think you could talk about like traumatic experiences. If you see or hear a lot that you can't really handle or tackle, and you don't really know how to handle it, And especially if your surroundings, like your parents or your friends and so on, they don't agree with you. So they don't see this as a problem, and you can see that it is a problem. And that would make you feel really lonely in your belief about that also animals need to be taken care of, just like humans. We are animals too, we're all animals. So there is no reason that you shouldn't respect life.
So when you feel these, are there any physical symptoms, like in how your body reacts?
I think it's very individual. But of course, if you get traumatized, you would have like flashbacks where you can see the films or the types that you have seen, you can see them again, and you can relive what you have been through. So it's like your mind is playing like a film. And then you can also, of course, shiver or feel like anxiety has a lot of different symptoms, like having a hard time to breathe or feeling powerless. Yeah, so there are many different kinds of symptoms, of course, physical symptoms too, that your body can also be very tense because you don't know how to handle your psychological emotions and your thoughts. And then you get tense because you don't know how to get it out from you. You don't know how to act on your feelings.
And can it be dangerous? Can it evolve to something else, or?
I wouldn't say it's dangerous in itself, no. I would say that you need support, and if you don't get any support at all, you can feel, of course, more and more lonely. So, of course, it could develop into like a depression, for instance, if you have no help and no support from anyone, and you see that there is something going on that you cannot understand, because it's like, it looks like cruelty, or I mean, it is cruelty, and you can see it is cruelty. So you see that there is cruelty going on. Some beings, living beings, who suppress other living beings, and you don't see anybody else acting on it. So, of course, if you don't know how to act, you don't know what to do about it, you could get depressed. One way of looking at depression is actually to see it as powerlessness and rage together. So if you get really angry about something and you don't know any way to handle it, and so you feel powerless. And those things together for a long time could also make you depressed.
So you mentioned earlier that one way to get less suffering is to actually be active.
Yeah.
That's a way of dealing with it. I know there are, especially when it comes to vegans, some active vegans who really, really love animals, for example. And but they still go to slaughterhouses, or they see the fur industry, and they see terrible things in their mind, and they get very upset. But they feel they need to do this because of the animal. Some get very upset by what they are seeing. Can you say something about this?
Yes, of course they get upset. I mean, that's a normal reaction. I mean, we as human beings, we have empathy. We can feel compassion. So actually, everybody should feel this frustration. But I think most people, they shut their eyes. They deny what's going on. So I think that these activists, they do a really important work to show the rest of the world or the rest of the society, I mean, to what's going on in these slaughterhouses and fur industries. Any place that is an industry that has animals is an awful place to be as an animal, of course, and also as human beings. I mean, there are also studies showing that people working in slaughterhouses, in the areas around slaughterhouses, there are more violence than in other areas. So you get used to it, you habituate to violence actually, and also very cruel or mortal violence, brutal. So your question was actually about the activists, and I think absolutely that they suffer from it, and I do think they need peer support. So you can't do this all by yourself, but it's nothing that will harm you for a long time, because you know that you're doing something towards it. You have this feeling of you're actually working, you're putting your body in the situation that is the most awful you can think of, and you're actually doing something about it. And activists, as I've seen, are never working all alone with this, so they have peers that support them.
If you would see a person that you feel is really suffering and maybe cannot he or she herself cope with what they are seeing or experiencing, is there anything one can do for them? Like, is there any professional help to get, and how do you do?
First of all, I think the best thing to do is to talk with them and let them talk. It's like if you compare this to having a close relation to someone who dies, you need to be able to suffer, you need to be able to feel your sorrow, you need to have those feelings. So what you can do as someone on their side is to let them talk or let them be quiet, but show that you're there. So we don't need to see these strong and negative feelings as something bad or as something psychiatric, because they aren't. They are totally adequate feelings, that it's healthy feelings actually to feel this bad about it. But then if you see that this person goes into something that goes on and on and on, and it hinders them in their everyday life, like they can't keep up with school, or they can't keep up with work, or they can't keep up with friends, so for a long time they don't work or function the way they usually did, then it is a problem that could be psychiatric, that could need professional care. So I think there are steps before professional care.
It's just when it becomes really, really severe, like you cannot have a normal life.
Exactly. Yeah. I would just want to say that everything before that is feelings that we go through. They are difficult, but you get much better work by just being with friends and close people that understand you and that know what you go through.
You are actually very much a specialist into also anxiety when it comes to climate. Mm. Is there some similarity with the activists for the climate?
Yes, absolutely. And many people become activists because they have this anxiety. You can have anxiety for animals or for the climate or for just this. There are many issues that are, as I see them, they go hand in hand. So we need to deal with all of these issues at the same time, actually. And yes, many people feel it's like a cognitive dissonance where the society do things that we all know in our minds that it's wrong. So we don't get a whole picture, or we feel that we're acting in the wrong way, and that makes you feel bad. So you want to try to get away from it. So some people, as I said before, they deny it, or they say it's not as bad as it is, and the other people feel they need to act, so they become activists.
So, like, if you go that far that you need professional help, where do you go? What is the difference between a psychologist, a therapist? Where do you go?
Yeah, it's not totally easy, because it's not really seen as a psychiatric problem if you have anxiety because of animal welfare or climate, for instance. So where you go, it depends on your age. If you're below 18 years, in Sweden we have child and youth psychiatric clinics. And what you need to do is to tell them you're suffering, not the reason firsthand, but you're suffering. That is how your life, everyday life looks. Because as I said, if your everyday life is hindered, then that is the problem that you need to get help with. And then it is not totally easy to get help, because not all therapists or psychologists would recognize the reason for your anxiety. And of course, that would mean that you don't feel really met in your needs. If you're above 18, there are many different places or to go that is psychiatric care, and there are also different, like private psychologists that you can meet in apps or online. And I think that you're lucky if you find a person who understands this. I don't know, I haven't looked, but maybe psychologists and therapists are starting to actually write this on where you can find them, that this is a person that understands your issues.
So how does it look globally when it comes to understanding these kind of problems due to climate crisis or animal welfare, like in Sweden and globally?
It's rising a lot. So I think rather soon we will have an understanding and awareness in all of the care system that this is something that people know and feel, and it's something that we all should also try to acknowledge, that it is a problem and we need to do something about it, and it's a normal reaction to feel bad about it. So it is a rising awareness around this issue, or these issues, because there are many. And I think that rather soon most caregivers will also see this and be able to meet the person's need in a good way. Right now, I think you need to look for these psychologists or therapists to know that you will get the right person.
You need to make sure you are contacting the right person.
As for now, in 2020, I think many people, of course, feel totally diminished if the psychologists they meet don't have the awareness and don't see the problem.
So what is your suggestion for people who are activists to feel good in their life?
First of all, to actually hang out with friends who see life the way you do, because you really need those people who understand your thoughts about this. So that is one very important part. And another very important part is to choose your fights. You can't fight everybody, and you will not get people to come with you if you try to fight the opponents, most of all, because opponents aren't going to listen to you. You need to talk to the people that are neutral or maybe passive, but still understand what you're talking about. Then you will get more people to come with you, to engage with you, and also to take pauses, to actually realize that you can't fight all the time, because you will not be able to. You will crush yourself on the way. You need to take pauses. I know it's a feeling as if you're in two different worlds, like one world where you know these things are going on, like animal welfare, or not welfare, and also climate and injustice and so on. So that's the one world. And another world is just business as usual. Everything is going on like nothing had happened, like there was no awful things. And these two worlds, maybe you need to just accept them and see, okay, sometimes I need to step into the world where business as usual is going on, and I can just be there to have a pause from the other. It's not, you're not going crazy. This is how the world looks like right now. We have two different realities, actually. And also to go out into the nature. That is very healing to us, to be a part of nature and to be in nature. So that would be a very good way to have a pause from all this.
Is there something else you would like to add?
The world needs models. We need leaders that will take us the way we need to go. And activists right now are these leaders. They are the ones that took the steps before everybody else. And that is needed. That has always been needed. If no one starts walking on the road, then no one else will come. But if someone starts, then other people can also start walking that road, and there will be eventually a social tipping point where there is a new norm created. So I think we're actually going to get to a society where eating animals is not norm anymore. And the people that are active now, they are the pathfinders.
We have here listened to an interview with Paula Richter, a Swedish psychologist focused on climate and well experienced in veganism. And here are some news. The big fur-producing country Denmark has killed millions of minks due to a corona outbreak in the farms, where the virus has mutated in the mink farms and also spread to humans. The neighboring country Sweden, which also has active mink farms, has decided not to order killing of minks due to corona risk, even though corona, but not the mutated form, also has been found in these farms. At the same time, animal rights organizations in Sweden are appealing to both the government and also to the people via extensive advertisement in media that the time to end mink farming has come. Stefan Löfven, Prime Minister of Sweden, has said last week that Sweden do not intend to stop mink farming. The fast food giant McDonald's has announced they will introduce a line of plant-based meat alternative next year, 2021. These will include substitutes to burgers and chicken. On Nasdaq, the stock Beyond Meat has the last month fallen from $195 to $124. The fall is due to their report from Q3, which showed less sales than expected. A reason, cited by CNBC, is the pandemic that has reduced restaurant sales of the alternative meat product. My current reflections. In Sweden, we have a saying that says, "You can't see the forest because of all the trees." It's about missing the overall picture. The other day I thought about it, but the other way round, that you don't see the trees because of the forest. This is typical in the animal industry. You don't see the individuals. Actually, I was thinking about minks. To be exact, I was thinking about 17 million sentient individuals. In the small country Denmark, which is a major producer of fur made out of minks, a mutated coronavirus was found in the mink farms and all minks were ordered to be executed. 17 million minks to be exact. Or well, some say 12 millions. Some say 15 millions. Just the fact that the number can differ with millions is quite shocking. So 17 million is like a forest. You can't see the individuals. It's an entity of itself. You kill it all, and at once. But if you would line up each of these mink individuals, you would start to feel how many they are. If you would get to know a single individual in that entity, that individual would have a personality, be a living being, be a he or maybe she, not an it. It would be someone with feelings and longings. Well, fur industry has been boycotted by many since long, yet it doesn't seem to have vanished one bit. Well, the fur customers doesn't reside in the Nordic countries, even if the fur is produced there. The clients are mostly from China. The interesting thing with the mink killing order is actually that they were ordered to be killed due to corona risks. In the normal case, they would anyway have been killed during this time of year and have their skin removed. So millions of minks are usually killed every year anyway, but we just don't talk about it. These mass killings for fur has been going on year after year. The majority of these caged animals only get to live for 11 months. Some are kept for breeding of new minks, so they get some more years. So in Denmark, 12 millions or 17 millions are killed every year by gassing. We all understand how much time it must take to kill so many million individuals, one by one. So gassing by carbon dioxide are done every year. A very cruel form of death. By the way, also used for killing pigs in Sweden and in other countries. So it's time to end this episode. This podcast is free to listen to, so please spread it to vegans and also non-vegans that may be open to veganism. And do make sure you're reminded every time a new episode is out. You can subscribe for it for free on many different platforms. For example, on YouTube, Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, and more places. After talking to both Clare Mann and Paula Richter, there are some points that I really will take with me. I liked the description both expressed, like we are living in two parallel worlds. A vegan world, where we see all injustices that are done to animals, and a non-vegan world, where there seem to be no problems, business as usual. I liked the term cognitive dissonance. It really describes how we can feel about handling two worlds. And both the psychiatrists seem to say that for our well-being, we need to take pauses. That can be done by us sometimes stepping into the there is no problem world. We need relaxing, and being in the nature is good. And I also learned that being active, becoming a so-called activist, can be a good way to handle inner feelings. When we do something for good causes, we feel that we at least do something. And both stressed the importance of support from friends and society. And I know that the global vegan community is very welcoming and supportive to each other, and that is so needed. So keep going strong. Hope you liked this episode. My name is Minal Parek Nygård. See you soon again.